Okay, so before we look at the pictures, I just want, actually, well, let's put up this picture first here. This is Titian's Venus with an Organist. Right? And I think this is a picture from the Renaissance. And Titian is, of course, he's after Botticelli. But I think what's interesting about this picture is that, so, I know that you can't read Umberto Eco because he has a lot of problems in many things that he writes. But he has a few insights into aesthetics, which I think can help us to understand painting. I think in aesthetics, he's right. And dare I say, Maritain and Gilson are wrong. Right? I think actually he understood Aquinas on aesthetics better than Gilson and Maritain.
Who is this? Sorry?
Umberto Eco.
Is it Eco like
ECO?
ECO.
Yeah.
Is he Italian?
He's I think he's Spanish or Italian. But again, I don't recommend reading him. I think on most things he's kind of crazy. But so what Eco says is that Aquinas understood, and I want to say this because I think art can be a good way for us. I remember one of the first lectures I ever got in the work was in my intro philosophy course. Carl Schmitt. Carl Schmitt taught it. And Carl Schmitt basically, he gave me one insight that I've always kind of found helpful. He says, when you look at history, you can see that there is a relationship between how ideas progress, how politics progresses, how art progresses, how architecture presents. How you can look at any field of life, but they don't always progress together. So part of the challenge always looking at history is trying to put together, well, there could be an advance or there could be a degradation of philosophy in one generation. It only makes itself felt in the next generation, right? Or there could be some sort of advance in painting, and philosophers see the painting and it inspires them in some way. I think what's interesting as far as thinking of being a pedagogue is that you can look at certain paintings and certain artists and what they're up to, and you can see that this is a fruit of a series of ideas. You can see the same thing in politics. But it's not always linear. And that's part of the challenge of trying to decipher what's going on. So essentially, we'll say more about Occam in a moment, but essentially again, Occam, the nominalist, becomes super influential throughout Europe before the Renaissance. And nominalism essentially says that there's no real meaning in things. Right? Words are empty. Words do not correspond to the reality of the thing. One of the things that this can lead to is a kind of naturalism. I can paint whatever I want. Why? Because the symbol, the sign, has no relation to the reality. And one effect of science is that I can do in science whatever I want. Why? Because the advance in science, there's no nature. Nature is an empty concept. So what happens in the one of the things that, and there is a kind of a dark side of the Renaissance. We usually don't get exposed to it. And the reason we don't, because obviously you don't want to talk about these things all the time, but there is a dark side to the Renaissance. Right? The Renaissance was started by the Medicis because they were usurers and because they were grinding the workers of Florence into abject poverty. And one of their ideas studying ancient culture was, well, the Romans, they figured out how to engage in usury and pacify the population. Bread and circus, carnival, right? Fat Tuesday. But Fat Tuesday goes from January 1st to Ash Wednesday, right?
Is that where it originates?
Yeah. I mean, carnival, yeah. Carnival
Oh, in Venice.
is the time before Ash Wednesday.
Yeah. Okay. What?
Yeah. So part of what's going on in the Renaissance is actually a degradation of morality. And it's led by the usurers. And they're the ones that oftentimes start promoting a kind of naturalism in painting. And it's not just because they're like interested in the human. Well, it's because they're too interested in the human body. Let's put it that way. For the wrong reasons. And oh no. So part of the Renaissance is, yes, trying to explore new forms of painting. But it's also true that Titian, and I think this painting kind of shows, what are you really trying to do here? Are you trying to play the organ, or are you trying to do something else? Right? And so this painting is a great painting, and I think this painting symbolizes a lot of it does symbolize kind of the underbelly of a lot of modern philosophy that never gets brought up. Because it's also in the Renaissance that we get the first real pornographers. And of course, one of the first pornographers was Avanti, who was a friend of Titian. And he was the first one to actually produce books.
How do you spell Titian?
T-I. All the guys from the Heights know this.
He went to the Heights.
It's true. Sorry.
Actually, I was telling my friend today that I was talking to about this, because he's written an article on this point, on philosophy and art and everything. I was telling him, actually, I think there's going to be like half the class. This could actually help them get into the class even more, because they had Joe Cardenas. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so I think this. So you see also right in the, and of course Gilson and Maritain, none of them are right about this. But also, what Eco says is that for Aquinas, what is art? Right? Art fundamentally it's a kind of mimesis. Why? Because Aquinas understands in metaphysics, in a way of speaking, existence is the form of essence. Right? Ultimately, you have to get down to the unity of existence and essence. And so if you're going to have an art that follows on metaphysics, it can't be formalism. There's always a danger in art of being kind of a Neo-Platonist. Now, I don't want to say being Plato, being like kind of a little bit Neo-Platonist, saying there are these magical forms that are up there. And somehow art has to conform to these forms. And if art doesn't conform to these forms, it's not really art. And so what Eco says is that Aquinas understands that what art should, and actually one of my first lectures by Carl Schmitt was trying to get at the same thing, right? That you can see in art, in great art, there's a kind of unity between existence and essence in bringing out the essence. In other words, it's mimesis, there's some sort of an imitation of nature, but you're also trying to express nature in a way that brings out the essence of the thing. So it's possible in art that you exaggerate some aspect of the essence, or you do something with the accidents of the art itself that helps you get to the essence of things. The danger of art is when you go towards naturalism, the exact replication of nature that gives you no real insight into the essence of the thing. And so you start to fall away from mimesis, and you just get into replication. And there's always a danger in that, because in doing that, you can actually reduce, if you're a nominalist, if there's no essence and existence that unites the thing, that makes it be what it can be. In other words, if your art is empty, it's just the imitation of nature. But it's the imitation of meaningless nature, of naturalist nature. Which means it could be anything. It could be, and of course, what's the lowest common denominator in nature, especially for guys? We all know what that is, right? So this is the danger of art when it becomes nominalist or skeptical. when it's rooted in nominalism or skepticism. Or formalism, saying that art is just techniques. Oh, Picasso's so great because he had these techniques. No. Every time Picasso broke up with a girl, he did some cubist painting of some, destroying women because he hated women at that point. Right? But so Carl Schmitt says, you can see, especially beginning in the 19th century, there's this movement towards naturalism. And when there's this movement toward naturalism, you see art get further and further from the mimetic imitation of existence and essence. Now, 1525, most of you, I also told my interlocutor this afternoon when we were talking about this, that 1525 would also be something that you may have had an experience of. You remember when you go to the Vatican museums, you go to the Sistine Chapel, if you have a tour guide, the tour guide will always stop and show you the graffiti of the German or the Swedish soldiers when they sacked the Vatican in 1525. So basically, they went into the Sistine Chapel. So when you get, because of the Renaissance, there was it's understandable that there was a kind of iconoclastic reaction against the Renaissance. In your textbooks and your history books, and all sorts of people will always say, well, it was irrational the way they responded to the Renaissance. Well, that's because they leave out that there was pornography going on, right? Avanti's pornography. They leave out all the salacious stuff that was going on. They leave out, for example, whenever people talk about Savonarola, he took over Florence in 1490. Who did Savonarola kick out of Florence? He kicked out of Florence the usurers and the sodomites, the bankers and the wankers. He kicked them both out. Pretty women in Florence could not find a husband because sodomy and pedophilia were widespread during the Renaissance. And so when Savonarola comes to power, he and the Council of Ten, they decide, well, we got to put an end to, if we're going to put an end to usury, we got to start our own banks. Well, what are we going to do? That was the origin of the credit union. It wasn't in Florence. There were other saints of the 14th and 15th century that implemented credit unions. St. Anthony of Padua, St. Anthony of Florence, St. John of Capistrano, and the other, St. Bernardine of Siena. That's the other one I was forgetting the other day. St. Bernardino of Siena. These guys.
Savonarola?
Pardon?
How do you spell Savonarola?
Savonarola? Venerable Savonarola to you.
Why were you saying the other day too that he's the only one that people remember? Is he infamous or something?
Well, he's infamous because I'll say a little bit about that now. Yeah. So Savonarola, what he does is what all these saints had done before, when they were able to establish credit unions. First of all, he has a bonfire of the vanities. He had these boys go around the city with lilies. Lilies in one hand and a cup in the other, and they would knock on the door of a house and they would basically say, anything in your house that has led you into sin, it should be burned. And there's going to be a burning today in the plaza, in the piazza, right? And also, then they would also say, and we need to establish a bank that won't give out usurious loans. But we need some money to be the foundation of that bank, of the credit union. That's the origin of the credit union. Right? So then people would give money to form the foundation of the credit union, and then they would throw out all their stuff in the piazza, and then they would have a bonfire of the vanities. That's the origin of Bonfire of the Vanities, where they would burn all the pornographic material.
Did he read Dante?
Pardon?
Did he read Dante's work?
He read Dante. He's the 1490s.
But did he burn it?
Someone might have been led into sin by something that Dante wrote. That's quite possible. And therefore they threw it in the fire.
So why is he infamous? Is it for the Bonfire of the Vanities?
So he's infamous for that, but also because he criticized Alexander VI, who was a very scandalous pope.
Yeah.
Right? Savonarola basically said to the French, I think you should come in and dethrone Alexander VI. And I think for that, Alexander VI declared He did what the U.S. does with countries like Iran and Afghanistan. He imposed sanctions that led the city into famine. But the city actually sided with Savonarola because it was a scandalous pope, right? But eventually it got so bad that they basically put him to death. And then when the Jesuits were formed not long after this, they made a vow that they would never allow the canonization of Savonarola because he criticized the Pope. And in those days, they took the fourth vow to always defend the Pope. So the Jesuits throughout history have always blackballed Savonarola. They have. There's a book in the pre-study written by this Jesuit. Savonarola, Orestes Bronson has tried to rehabilitate Savonarola. We cannot let that happen. I mean, that's basically the thesis of the book.
They used to take the 4 vows, do they not anymore?
I don't know. I don't know what the Jesuits do these days. Read the book if you want to. Read the book about the
But he's
Jesuits.
still venerable.
He's still venerable, yeah.
Could there be a gap soon?
It could happen. Actually, there are Italians that are pushing for his beatification, yes. Yeah.
I mean, Joe Cardinal spoke about that in the class.
Yeah. So, the reaction against... What's going on?
No,
It needs like a...
yeah, give it.
Oh, okay. The reaction against the Renaissance is a kind of iconoclasm. And you see this...
Just like cancel.
You see the iconoclasm in the Vatican museums, right? The Lutherans who are coming through, sacking Rome in 1525, they're in the Vatican Museum, and they're overly sensitive, right? They're overly sensitive to any images at all, right? As being blasphemous. And the same thing happens, actually, we'll get to Luther later on, but you can also see it in the first communist revolt, which took place in Munster under Thomas Munsell, right? Again, that's kind of the extreme reaction of the rejection of the Holy Roman Empire, the rejection of combination of church and state. And they basically go to Munster and they establish the communism of holding all wives and children in common and whatnot, the Anabaptists, right? We now call them the Amish. It's always interesting to ask the Amish if they know the first city they controlled in the Reformation. They usually don't.
What was it?
Munster,
Munster.
right?
Is that where Munster cheese comes from?
Yeah. Yeah. But that's not because of the Reformation. So then, of course, after the Council of Trent, you get the implementation of Thomism, and the Council of Trent writes about art. And there is a healthy way there's a mimetic way of portraying nature. And probably the person that best expresses that would be Rubens. And actually, if you're ever at Shelbourne and you want to do a little bit of a cultural thing, this painting is in the Toledo Museum of Art. Princess Spinola. Rubens' Princess Spinola.
Is this Ruben like Ruben?
Rubens. Rubens, yeah. He has some paintings in some of the churches in Rome that we typically go to on Univ, right? But Eco says that Rubens, in a way, he responds in a way that's faithful, both to the demands of art and also to the instructions from the Council of Trent. And what you see in France, which I mentioned the other day, what you see in France is that in this time you start to get into mannerism, naturalism. You know, the artist who will show rabbits being cut up and, you know, being put on the butcher shop. But you also see then, also in the beginning of this time in France, now we're, let's say, getting into the 17th, 18th century, the 1700s, you start to see the return of pornography. In fact, one of the things that the British consciously tried to do to subvert the French Empire is they got a hold of the postal roads from London to Belgium into France, so they could basically funnel pornography into Paris. Because they knew if you funnel pornography into the society, over time it'll weaken the society, and it'll also create a kind of revolutionary class. it's also in the 1700s that you get the beginning of all these books. Diderot, I told you this the other day. Diderot's book, about the nuns who do terrible things, and they, yeah. So, and part of this is because Richelieu blocked, right, the full implementation of Council of Trent from coming into France. So, and what you see happening then in art, especially in the 19th and 20th century, art eventually just crumbles. To where in the 20th century, art is essentially, it's just insider trading. Art is insider trading in the 20th century. It's just whatever oligarch wants to inflate the market for the guy that he likes, that's the guy that does it. And artists can do whatever they want to express their hatred of man, their hatred of nature, chopping people up, just trying to say they have these great skills, because of kind of formalism. And this is where I think Gilson and Maritain had a little bit of a problem. Because they, for example, Maritain's best friend was Victor Nabokov, who was a pornographer. He's the brother of Vladimir Nabokov, or the cousin. You probably heard Nabokov. Lolita. He wrote Lolita.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah,
and Maritain could never bring himself to criticize the art of the Nabokovs. Right? He could never bring himself. And so you see this in all of his writings on aesthetics, that he says, well, morality is not, there's no connection between morality and art. Art is just a formal expression of skills. That's all he can say about it in the end. And Gilson, I think, because he was friends with Maritain, he essentially says the same thing about art. He can't really deal with it. And even my one of my mentors, Ralph McInerney, his book on art and prudence, you can tell when you read the book, he knows that, for Maritain and for Gilson, there's no real relationship between art and the virtue of prudence or morality. Because art is just it's a formal expression of skills. And you get the sense when you're reading, at least I got the sense when I was reading this essay by McInerney, that he knows that this isn't right, but he has such admiration for Gilson and Maritain, he can't criticize them. Right? He can't say, well, there has to be another way of looking at it.
It's the academics.
And also, he had such a, Umberto Eco is not, I think, this thing I just told you about Umberto Eco, that's the only thing I think I've ever heard of him that's right. Right? Is this thing about mimesis. Umberto Eco he has all sorts of problems. So I'm not telling you to go read Umberto Eco. Don't go run into Father Tom. Hey! We're reading Umberto Eco! Right? What could possibly go wrong?
We're all archives.
So I think art is yet another way by which we can see and start to understand a little bit of the developments of modern philosophy, a little bit of a bigger picture approach, no pun intended. And then, are there any questions? Yes. We don't need the screen anymore.
When you said it's art, unless it's trying to draw out the essence of something, and if eventually just trying to imitate the natural, you said that's problematic. But is there a way to just imitate the natural? Because nature is God's creation, and there is a beauty.
That's why we put the Princess Spinola up there.
Yeah. So
there is a way to imitate nature that draws out. In other words, and this is what Carl Schmitt would say, there is a way to imitate nature, right? To draw out some aspect of the essence, to highlight it. But it's got to be in conformity with existence. And so there is a way to highlight nature, to highlight some aspect of the essence. This image of the Princess of Spinola, it's not a perfect image of her. It's not a photograph. The way the light is, it highlights her cheeks, it highlights the gleam in her eye. It's not natural, in the naturalistic sense of natural. It brings out the essence of the beauty of this lady. but it's also so it's not pornographic nature. It's not just the crass imitation of nature as if there's no essence, which is what a kind of nominalism would lead you to. It's also just not the formal application of skills, though skill is part of it.
What do the Greeks do when it comes to art?
So I think the Greeks. I think you can look at. We were having a little bit of a discussion about this at home, and at least where I live, like Umberto Eco is someone you can't mention, right? So I was trying to. We were having a little I was trying to say exactly what I'm telling you, and that how. That art is mimetic, but it's Thomistic mimetic, where it holds existence and essence in a kind of tension, and trying to highlight certain aspects of the essence. And so, a number of people at the table that were there in that particular moment, some visitors, they had only read Gilson and Maritain. So what ends up happening in those situations is they interpreted what I said as if, oh yeah, art is an adherence to these great forms, right? The golden, what is it? The golden mean or the golden ratio, right? The golden ratio, like that's the best expression of art. In other words, they immediately reverted to a kind of formalism of art.
Yeah.
And then of course you get somebody that comes along and says, well, no, they argue against formalism, and they say, well, no, I mean, art is just like the great application of skills. So anything can be art. Art is just what I say is art, or it's what you say is art, right? And so this mimetic understanding, at least in that particular conversation, the mimetic understanding of art got lost, because once people started arguing about between formalism and art is just like me showing my skills, I just kind of shut up at that point for the sake of peace, right? Live in peace with all men, as St. Paul says, especially in the center, right? So this isn't an easy point to get. But then, so what happened is, what happened after this discussion was that someone, what ended up happening is that the next day on the What's Up of the house, this guy put like a Greek statue and a Roman painting of a face. It's like, and actually it's a pretty nice, I have to admit, it's a nice painting of the face. And I thought actually that was a great point, because it showed this Greek statue that got shown and then this Roman painting of a face. It showed that there was something mimetic, right? That they had a kind of beginning understanding of that art is a kind of mimetic imitation of nature, but not a nominalist portrayal of nature, but a more robust portrayal of nature, of somehow there being something of an essence that you can portray.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right? Now, actually, the guy that put that on, because my position got attached to the formalist position, he thought he was refuting me. So I had to go tell him, no, actually, I think your picture actually proved my point. Right? Yes.
So is photography any kind of...
Well, so photography, would photography be art? Is that the question?
Yeah, what do you think from a philosophical perspective?
Yeah, I think so.
Photography or other
I think
technology like that.
So photography, I could see on the one hand how you could say photography would not be art. If photography is just, I take a picture. But you can see that there are ways that photographers take pictures. Precisely, there's a kind of skill involved, and they want to highlight a certain aspect of the light in the picture, or they want to highlight the beauty of the face, or the elegance of this. So there are things you can do in photography that are not just simple, exact imitation of nature. So I think you could say that, well, yeah, there are some films which are just like crass violence or crass pornography. That's not art. That's a kind of naturalist depiction of nature. But I think you could say that there could be certain forms of photography.
Because those don't go to the essence.
Yeah. Because they're holding in tension. Like you have existence and essence. Right? And mimesis is going to hold these in tension while trying to bring out. And when I say existence and essence, I mean the full logos. Right? The full understanding of things.
It seems like it's hard to make distinctions here.
I think one thing I used to do when I taught this is you look at different things.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to look at different things over and over, and you can say this is art, that's not.
You know
This
when
is
you
a-
see it.
And then you develop a kind of sense. I don't want to say you know it when you see it exactly, but you can develop an experience because you develop an experience, right? There are some things like playing a sport, learning how to sing, music. There are some things you learn in part by developing the skills that tell you what this is and what this is not. You can do it with music. So I think you can do it also with paintings,
Yeah.
and I think you can do it with photography. But I think to teach it, you have to kind of show several. At least what I experience is you got to show several things while you're explaining things. Yes, and of course also this requires somewhat of an understanding of the philosophical terms we're using. The danger, I think, what I've experienced, what I just told you, is that the danger of explaining this is that there's going to be certain formalists that are going to say, oh yeah, this is formalism. And then there's going to be others who are like anti-formalists. And they're going to end up fighting with each other because they're always fighting with each other. Yes.
So like I guess there you're trying to emphasize that you're still trying to maintain attention.
Right.
Instead of giving.
Yeah. I mean, yes, exactly. You have to there is a kind of tension in great art. And sometimes the tension is with, like ballet. I think ballet is an example of something that's modern, that actually is an artistic development. There's a tension in ballet. You have to kind of develop a little bit of a filter for how people are dressed, right? But there is a kind of beauty in the dance. And it is a kind of imitation. You can tell a story through dance. You can bring out the essence of a story without any words, just through music and dance. Yes.
Do you think video games fit into this progression of art?
Video games.
He's not in this class. You're not there.
Yeah.
but like, like pornography is like kind of like that's a progression.
Well, I think you could say that. I think one of the things I think that's good about this is it helps you develop a continuum, right? In a continuum, there's a more and a less, and there are a number of things that could fall into the more and the less, and then there are some things that fall outside. Is Tom Brady's rookie football card art? I don't know, but it just sold for $1 million, right? I don't think it's art, but it's an example of how art has become kind of like insider trading, just kind of like a market which you can manipulate. And I'm sure video games. I stopped playing video games when it was just Pac-Man, or the Space Invaders. That was my last video game. So that was not art. But I think you could say there's a continuum. I think that's what I like about the mimetic theory is that you can admit there's a continuum. There's some things that fall outside of it. Like literature. I mean, literature, I think, is the same thing. There are some things that are just so crass and pornographic or crass and violent. I don't think you can genuinely call them literature. And there are other things that are they're such philosophical, they're not really literature. It's philosophy. Yes.
So I was just wondering, just to clarify, the degradation of art in the Renaissance period, how does that fit into the cycle you were talking about earlier in terms of
What I would say, yeah. So
skepticism?
So how does the degradation of art in the Renaissance fit in? Basically, once you have nominalism, one of the key features of nominalism is that words do not conform to reality. Words do not conform to nature. So one of the effects of nominalism is a kind of naturalism. Whatever's out there, the material things that are out there, that's just something we can manipulate. It's just something we manipulate. So then, also, if words do not have symbolic value, Augustine speaks about this. I mean, Augustine teaches this. Aquinas teaches this. Words are important. Why? In the beginning was the logos. The logos, one of the potential meanings of logos is word. It oftentimes gets translated into Latin, into verbum. Logos will be translated into verbum. In English, it'll oftentimes get translated into word. That's not the only meaning, but it's one important meaning. So, word the word is important. We are given the power to name things. That's in Genesis, right? That's one of the functions of man. We can name things. And so the names that we give things, there is some correspondence between the word and the reality, the word and the nature. It may not be perfect, it may not be complete, but there is some correspondence. So in other words, why? Because the word is a symbol. The word is a symbol or a sign. Symbols and signs enable us to think analogically, to say what is and what is not in the relationship between two things. If you remove that, if you say there's no meaning in words, you're essentially saying there's no meaning in signs or in symbols. So, let's say before the Renaissance, there's all this art, which is, there's icons. There's all this art which is trying to portray in a symbolic way the great mysteries of the faith. Their skills have not fully developed, so that all they can do in churches is paint them blue and put some stars up there before the Renaissance. So the skills have not advanced, but they are trying to get a kind of meaning in things. So, but if you become a nominalist and you say there's no meaning in symbols, there's no meaning in signs, well then that in a sense makes art veer in the direction of naturalism. I look within myself, I look at my passions, I look at my desires, and I become Titian. I could very easily become Titian or Avenatti. Why? Because there's no sign or symbolism in this. I'm just kind of imitating a cheap version of nature. Yes?
So why does it have to be cheap imitation of nature? Why can't it be like a good imitation of nature?
What are you, Robert Bellarmine? We should just call him Robert Bellarmine from now on. No, that's exactly what the Council of Trent said. I mean, that's exactly what Michelangelo was up to. That's exactly what the Council of Trent says. That there you can make a distinction between a crass imitation of nature, which is pornography, which usurers use to get peasants into debt and addicted to their vices, so they'll get more into debt, right? That's not art, right? But there is a good imitation of nature, the mimetic imitation of nature, which is a full understanding of nature as being not the truncated version of nature or the truncated version of reason. And that's the whole point of the way that the Council of Trent dealt with art, which gives us the Baroque period.
But is the mimetic going a step beyond just the pure imitation of nature? So you can have
Yes, because well, first of all, the point here is this: philosophically, what is nature? Is nature just your passions and desires? Beginning towards in the Renaissance, the answer, some will start to answer, especially the Medici family, yes, absolutely. And then throughout all of modern philosophy, you're going to find philosophers that will say, yeah, that's all that nature is. It's just your self-interest. And part of your self-interest is just whatever temptation comes to you in any given moment. That's all nature is. And you can't say it's any more than that. You can't even say that part of nature is reason. See, because so part of it does come down to what is your philosophical understanding of nature? Is nature just an empty concept? If it's an empty concept, well, what takes its place? Well, in the Renaissance, at least a certain element of it, your passions. Or if you're Nietzsche, your passions. Rousseau, your passions. John Locke, self-interest. Does that make sense? All right, let's go.